the Qur'an is sometimes ambiguous, meaning that you will have one verse and you come with two different worldviews, distinctly opposite or even conflictual worldviews, but you can still make sense of the same text, the same ayat. I see this as miraculous because through that ambiguity, Allah makes the Qur'an relevant across the ages. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So in chapter 3, section 3, the material relevance of the Quranic text. So here I'm going through examples to show how relevant the Quran is today with that modern scientific mindset. So the example I want to cover is about celestial bodies and their orbits, how the Quran describes the planets, the stars, the moon, the sun, revolving in specific orbits. So the Quran describes the sun and the moon as sailing in the heavens, yasbahun, following a given path. And that is consistent with our modern notion of orbit. Like the moon has an orbit, now we know that the sun also has an orbit around the galaxy, within the galaxy itself. So this might seem obvious today with our heliocentric view of the world. But now, pause a moment and imagine being at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. For them, for the companions, they lived in a geocentric universe. The earth was at the center and everything revolved around. That's how they picture the world. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ and for hundreds of years until the 15th, 16th century. So for them, when they read that verse, it would again make sense. The earth is at the center and Allah describes the moon, the sun, the stars as revolving around that earth. And that's what I mean by the Qur'an is sometimes ambiguous, meaning that you will have one verse and you come with two different worldviews, distinctly opposite or even conflictual worldviews. One is geocentric, the other one is heliocentric. But you can still make sense of the same text, the same ayat. And that's for me, I don't see it as a disadvantage. I see it as an advantage, as a beauty. I see this as miraculous. Because through that ambiguity, Allah makes the Qur'an relevant across the ages. So when I say ambiguity, so oftentimes ambiguity in today's society has negative connotation, but on the opposite, no. That ambiguity, again, Shaykh Yasir Qadi would call it cryptic. That cryptic notion in the verses, that cryptic flavor in the verses, allow for the Qur'an to be relevant across the ages. That's quite amazing. And I told you this ambiguity, or the fact that the Qur'an is cryptic, allows for different readings, different interpretations. But it doesn't mean that you can read anything in the Qur'an. No, the Qur'an still distinguishes. The Qur'an still has some clear-cut point. The moon exists, the sun exists, they move, they are in an orbit. These are clear. You cannot negate it. But the Qur'an is silent on other points. He never talks about the trajectory of the earth. So when you read the Qur'an, you don't know if the earth moves or not. Allah is silent about it. Within that silence, I also see beauty and miracles. It would have been easy if, let's say, everything was made up. The Prophet ﷺ made the Quran up and say the earth is stationary. Because this was the common worldview of the people at the time. No one would have complained. Everyone would have accepted it. But he didn't, alayhi salam. Why? Because Allah didn't tell him anything about the motion of the earth. So he stayed silent about it. Subhanallah. It's like if Allah knew what would have been He knew which topic to be silent about to keep the Qur'an relevant at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and in today's society with that modern understanding of the universe, heliocentric view of the universe. Now we accept that the verse can be read with different worldviews. All right, sometimes conflicting worldviews. Okay, does it mean that the Qur'an was taking people in the past astray from the truth? No, it's our interpretation. The Qur'an is truth. Allah is one. Allah revealed the Qur'an. The Qur'an is truth, but it's you as a subjective human being who comes to the Qur'an with that mindset, with that specific conceptual understanding of the world, and you read it and you try to make sense of it. You have to make the effort to make sense of it. And depending on with which context, with which framework you come to the Qur'an, you'll make sense of it differently. With that said, if you look at the linguistic, if you look at the wordings of the verses, I see other miracles, subhanallah. The Qur'an mentioned that the sun and the moon and the stars, the celestial bodies, are swimming in heavens, yasbahun. And yasbahun, if you look carefully, if you look at the definition in dictionaries, you'll find that yasbahun is not really swimming, it's floating. It's being at the interface between water and air. And for me as a scientist, again, I see marvels within it. Why? Because let's look at it from a scientific point of view. What does swimming means? What does floating means? Floating means your body has a certain density, less dense than water to make you float, but not as dense as the air. Otherwise, you would fly. So you must have a density that is in between the water and the air. There's a clear link, dependence on your physical properties and those of the medium in which you are at the interface of. There's a physical dependency between you, your physical properties, the water, and the air. You must be lighter than the water, heavier than the air. That link, that dependence is hidden within the word yasbahun. And that's amazing. Why? Because, again, the Prophet and the companions, Prophet ﷺ and the companions, radiallahu anhum, for them they had a Ptolemaic view of the world. The earth at the center and the different celestial bodies like the moon, the sun, the planets, the stars, they were on different spheres, crystalline spheres. There were no specific relation between these spheres, between these bodies, celestial bodies. For Ptolemy and for the people after him, there were these celestial bodies were just moving in spheres, specific spheres around the earth without any relation to one another. Allah, by using yasbahun, says no. One, the moon, must be in a specific position with respect to the earth, with respect to the sun, with respect to the other planets, and so on. Now, with modern physics, modern science, you know that that relation exists. You must fulfill specific conditions for having an orbit around the sun or the moon around the earth. The moon must fulfill specific criteria that depend on its physical characteristics. It has to be of a certain size, a certain mass, at a specific distance from the earth. Otherwise, it would either fall onto the earth or being ejected from that orbit and get lost in space. So whenever you have a planet that rotates around the sun or the moon that rotates around the earth, that celestial body must fulfill specific criteria that depends on its physical properties, its mass, its distance from the center of the orbit, the speed at which it goes around. That's what I read through the verse, through the word'yasbahun', which again, as a scientist, makes me marvel. Of course, you could go to the point where you say, how did the Prophet ﷺ could ever know about that relation? And take this interpretation of يَسْبَحُونَ as a proof that the Qur'an must be divine, because that knowledge was not present at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But I would be careful. That's the argumentation of the Ijaz movement. But I would be careful with that. Why? Because that interpretation of the word يَسْبَحُونَ, it's mine. It's a subjective interpretation. It's because I have that scientific mindset. I read this through the world. But it's not clear. Allah was not explicit about that relation between the physical characteristics of the celestial bodies and the center of their orbit, and even between the different bodies. It was not explicitly said. So I take that interpretation as subjective. It convinced me, but it might not convince someone else. I cannot use that as an argument, irrefutable argument, to convince someone else that God exists, that the Qur'an is true, that Islam is true. No, I can't. But it's an evidence. I can take it as an evidence that will reinforce a pre-existing faith. So that's how I see miracles in the Qur'an. But these, again, are subjective miracles. May Allah accept from us. وجزاك الله خيرا. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.